This is the After Party. Your hosts are the Great Order and No White Guilt. The Honors Roll Call highlights and celebrates those who have conscientiously committed to monthly gifts of my work for White Wellbeing. And appearing on the All Stars portion on the Honors Roll Call today is the Good Girl. And those remaining on the Honors Roll Call are Hendrickson, Quebec, William, and Scott. Folks, there is no place where your financial support goes farther and more effectively for white well-being than right here. These people I just mentioned have great morality and integrity, and I salute them all. As for the crown winner of last week, the crown goes to Quebec for gifting a total of 50 Prometheus Rising dollars. Thank you so much, and congratulations, dear brother. In second place was a dear sister, DF, gifting $30. Thank you, wonderful woman, and congratulations as well. You can financially gift on Entropy at 15%. I'll have that up and running in just a moment or two. You can also watch the stream there, ask and vote on questions, and when you pose questions in the question widget, they will not disappear unless I or you delete them. You can also financially gift on Cash App at 6%. And as you all know, Jared and I evenly share the financial gifts with our guests here on the After Party. Now today, we have the one and only Horus on tap. Welcome, Horus. Please introduce yourself to our courageous community. Tell them where they can find you, and then Mr. George will take us into this scintillating conversation.
Hello, Jason. Hello, Jared. Hello, everyone listening. Firstly, just want to say thank you both for having me on. I'm still hiding behind an avatar at the moment. I know you both show your faces when living circumstances allow. Maybe that'll change, because I think the more of us who show ourselves, the better. But and I really appreciate you both having me on, and I also appreciate you both coming on the tribute stream for Simon Harris, which was 2 months ago, nearly 3 months ago now. And obviously that was a painful but also a heartwarming time. I think we honoured him, and he's certainly a man who deserved honouring. And I think the moment when you were on, Jason, when you played the little bit of him singing, was particularly moving. And but for anyone who's not heard of me before, obviously I'm from England. I started making videos about July last year, and generally, I mean, I would recommend people just take a look at my BitChute channel to get an idea of the kind of thing I make. I mean, the titles of the videos might not give you the best idea, but watching a bit of the content will. I usually say what the videos are about within the first minute or two. And I mean, content that was deemed hate speech was thrown off YouTube, so I won't go any more into that, so as not to endanger your channel. But that's what I do. I make videos, and I write the occasional article as well. I do occasional live streams, and I'm very grateful to you both for having me on. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, the feeling is mutual. It's an honor to have you on as well. It's always a fun thing when a person is new to TAP, as someone we've known about and have interacted with. Like you said, we're certainly aware of each other's work, and we were on your show with the Simon tribute, as you said, which was a very painful circumstance, and we know that you worked very closely with him. So, of course, at any point, if you want to reference the show that you did together and what your dynamic was like and what you learned from him at any other point, please do so. Everyone here knows how much we regard Simon and keep his memory alive in the work that we do, and have all this warmth and love for his family. I know it's been relayed to me through a few parties that the generous gifts that a lot of people gave to help the family through that painful time have gotten to his wife, and certain of our videos, like the tributes that we did, have gotten to his wife and wider family. So they really see, I believe, from the feedback I've gotten, that contrary to how we're painted by the enemy, that this really is ultimately a movement of love. And that's not a trite thing to say. I I know that the world is crazy and there's things to focus on that are negative and painful and seem dire every single day. But I think we need to remember that as well. And Simon had a great heart and embodied that, as we talked about. But at any rate, that's just what I wanted to say for a minute. Just struck me. Again,
could I add one thing about that?
Please do.
Yeah, he was just a guy who radiated goodness to my mind. I mean, I think he and I were actually quite different people, but the first moment that he suggested that we do a live stream together, I thought, yep, that sounds like a good idea. I like this guy. We did an hour, I think, and it was natural from the first minute. So there was no question that we'd do another one. And the next thing I know, we're doing a regular live stream, a weekly one. And before long, I realised, I think I partly realised this after he died, actually, but he had captured the zeitgeist in a way that I don't have that. But he suddenly appeared to have this knack of just choosing exactly the right guest to talk about the things that were foremost in a lot of people's minds, certainly on the British side, and I'm sure there were some listeners in America as well. And for anyone who wants to, Simon's channel is still up. It's just called Simon Harris. I think he had nearly 20,000 subscribers, if that helps you find him. It's a fairly common name. And all the shows are still up, and they're called European Freedom, and they started in autumn last year. And I recommend them still. I've listened to several of them since he passed away. And I was delighted to be part of that. I remember him more with joy than sorrow, which I'm happy to say. But at the same time, it feels terribly wrong that he just died like that. But I think he would approve of us carrying on as long as we remember him, and I think all three of us do remember him. So there we go.
Well, I didn't know him as well as you did, but I wholeheartedly agree. From what I know of him, he'd want us to carry on with that joy. I said at the time, through all this craziness, he had a song in his heart, and that really is an example to what I was speaking about a moment ago for all of us, that we, every day and age, every time period has its own challenges and crosses to bear. And I know we're living through a particularly crazy time, a bottleneck in our people's history. But we can't have that destroy our day-to-day lives. We still have to find joy in the day-to-day. And I'm very much about that. And he was a great example of that. So again, if he comes up again naturally, we would honor that, welcome that. We all honor him all the time. But we are here to get to know you a little better. And everyone comes to this with or through different means, with a different background. And I saw that you've discussed on other streams that you had a background as a Marxist, if I'm putting that correctly. Of course, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you could kind of take us through where you were, and we're particularly interested in, so that the people listening can have things to take away from this, really interested in focusing on what you believed during those days when you were adhering to that, as we say, that anti-white doctrine that calls itself Marxism. We don't like to use the words of our enemies. Jason is very precise about that and has given us a lot of clarity about things like that. It's that form of anti-whiteism that they call themselves Marxists. There's a lot of different forms and flavors of anti-whiteism, but the net result and how it affects us, because we have to always center ourselves, put ourselves in the center of our story, is that it's anti-white. That's the net result. But what did you believe? Why did you believe what you believed? How did that affect the choices you made in your life? If you can take a little time to paint a picture of that, we'll go from there.
Well, for me, it was very, very crude. I never even read Marx until after I'd already turned against the idea. But when I was about, I think 15, maybe 14, I just, for the first time, asked somebody, what does communism mean? And they told me in this cliched and misleading way that it just means basically everyone's equal, or everyone roughly has equal property in society. And I heard that, and in my naivety just thought, right, yeah, that's obviously the best political ideology. That's what I want. I want everyone to have what they need. Why shouldn't they? And all questions of the power of the state or of distribution or of private property or of freedom or of respect for the pre-existing civilization and, things that have formed over generations and what our ancestors wanted for us had never entered my mind. So it was basically just kind of teenage naivety for me that invited that idea in. And I found that whenever I said that to people, most of the people I would say it to, their response was, well, it's a nice idea, but it doesn't work in practice. I don't know if this is as common a cliche in America as it is in Britain, but it's very, very typical for people to say that.
Oh yeah, it is here as well.
Right. And it's that I came to realize later is completely untrue. It's a terrible idea. It can be made to work, perhaps, to some extent. Probably not in a sustainable way, but it can be. You can bring about some sort of communism by mass slaughter and almost total slavery, the most complete dictatorship that results from any political ideology that I've ever heard of. More complete than the ones that communists denounce. But this was still the prevailing idea in my mind until I was about 20 or 21, which is quite a while ago now. I'm in my late 30s now. But I remember one particular lesson at university. I had a tutor called Hillel Steiner. He was a Jewish Canadian libertarian, like left-leaning libertarian, but he was a really brilliant teacher. I still have a great deal of respect. I don't know if he'll remember me, but I remember him. And the way that he explained utilitarian, it wasn't even really the way he explained it, but he just explained the idea clearly as it should have been. Utilitarianism, which I know is not the same as communism at all, but it gave me a certain insight into philosophies which claim to address the well-being of the collective. And I'm answering your question a little indirectly here, but basically that started me on a path through libertarianism. And I would still call myself a libertarian in a lot of ways, but I'm a libertarian who does care about our people. And I think libertarians are actually really divided on this. There are libertarians have a terrible name amongst the distant right. But I think there are plenty of libertarians who are very sympathetic to our ideas. And I mean, yeah, I could say I'm a libertarian, but I'm also a nationalist. But yeah, once I started to embrace libertarian ideas and I cared about the rights of the individual and private property, that led me so strongly away from Marxism that I became, just very, very anti-Marxist now.
I've heard you talk about libertarianism as well, and we want to definitely get into that a little bit later in the conversation. But just while we're on Marxism now, you said it was a little more theoretical, but were you in a milieu at all? Did you have friends who were deeper into it and see how it affected their lives? I always like to try to get an idea of when someone starts with a certain premise or belief, how that's a first domino, and then that affects the ways that they allow themselves to see things and also don't allow themselves to see things. They mentally have parameters that they don't let themselves go to. And of course, lifestyle choices as well. They might think that they're doing things that are healthy, but they're actually very destructive to themselves and the people around them. Anything like that?
Yeah, I think I'm very cerebral in how I approach what is right and what is wrong. Not to say that I'm necessarily intelligent or correct. I try, but I was not part of any sort of particularly radical left-wing milieu. I would say most of my friends and family lean more left than right, which is, I don't know, that's just been completely normal to me in my life. There are plenty of right-wing people in Britain, but the left, as in America, I'm sure, dominates the culture. And basically, right-wing people are seen as the oddballs. And the left have it easier, and it's easy to just drift into left-leaning ideas. I don't know if I'm answering your question really, but
Well, the social milieu, friends, did you see it affect them? I mean, obviously, if not, we don't have examples. We can go on to other things.
I would say I grew up like from sort of university onwards. I grew up in a sort of quite a degenerate milieu, really. There was several of my friends descended into alcoholism, and there was plenty of drug taking as well. And I don't know, I hope I'm not endangering your channel, Jason, by talking about things like that. But it was an atmosphere where traditional values were not respected whatsoever, basically. Apart from a lot of us, love their families. I suppose that is one thing. But it was conducive to. I see Marxism and anarchism, especially, as being very natural accompaniments to degeneracy and an uncaring sort of attitude towards the well-being of people around you, really. And I would say I was part of that, and I've probably still got some scars from that. But I think it turned around. I began to improve as a person around 1920, and I've been on a slow, unsteady upward path since then. I think maybe I think and I hope. And that did not not by pure coincidence that coincided with getting out of Marxism and into ideas that are more based on respect for other people. Mm-hmm. I see Marxism as very, very much based on destruction, and I think a lot of people adopt it because they're angry with just something in their personal lives. They despise the certain things around them. They're not necessarily their own family, but things still close to them in society. And Marxism and anarchism are ways of opposing that, are vehicles for opposition.
Right, it channels that.
Yeah, that's how it seems to me. Yeah.
There's a kernel here I want to make sure we get to that might be important for us peoples of European descent. And that is, you said in the beginning how when it was theoretical, when it was presented to you as a teenager, it sounded like a nice idea because it's about equality, things being more fair. When it's just on a surface level like that, and so much of our discourse, whether we're talking about Marxism or anything else in our day and age, because we live in a world of sound bites and our education system is on a downward slope, I'm sure all of us see more and more every day that public discourse on ideas is just absolutely pathetic. There's no nuance. There's no trying to bring harmony to different ideas. Everyone is kind of corralled into an extreme this way or that way. And in our circles, I still say we need to be aware of that as well. We're not above reproach. Doesn't mean we have to be navel gazing and have analysis paralysis, but we're all here to kind of sharpen each other's swords, and we're kind of about that here. But what do you think that says about a trait in our people? And I believe traits can be good or bad. I'm not even saying this trait is negative. Any trait has negative or positive expressions depending upon how you channel it, the context of it. But that kernel of basic appealing to empathy, we talk about this all the time. The European man in general has a very pronounced sense of empathy. We can project ourselves into other people. We can project ourselves into animals. Sometimes, as we discuss here, what are your thoughts on that whole thing about how the cursory explanation of Marxism kind of plays to certain traits that we have and could be weaknesses when they're not balanced with other things?
I think actually the libertarians have some good answers to that, in that I think empathy is very, very welcome thing. We developed it, we evolved that for a reason, and you should generally, when you feel empathy towards someone, act upon it, and many, many good things come from that. But you shouldn't neglect your intellect, and you shouldn't neglect your other instincts. And I think we've been encouraged over perhaps the last century to give a dominant place to our empathy, and to ignore our concern for everything else. I mean, if empathy manifests as welcoming illegal immigration, that's something's wrong there. And it's not that empathy is a bad thing. It's that I don't really know. It's that everything else that could countervail it whatsoever has been suppressed. So I think like Marxists will try and bully you with empathy. They'll try and say, anything you do other than empathy for Somalis and Afghans and so on is evil, which is obviously ridiculous. And as I said, like libertarians, I think have some good rejoinders for that, because they say it's not empathetic to give away other people's property. It's not empathetic to, make promises that will be fulfilled from someone else's pocket or off someone else's labor. So basically, empathy, my answer would be that empathy is a good thing, but let not other people twist us into a false conception of it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so much of the contemporary world is, as I was mentioning, of just grossly imbalanced. A lot of these theories and ideas can be broken down to a simple metaphor. It's like asking someone to walk around on one leg, hop around on one leg. Everything in life is a synthesis of opposites, not in the Marxist dialectic way, in a harmonious way. Male and female joins together to create life. You have a left and right hemisphere of your brain. You have a left leg and a right leg. These things are supposed to work in concert, in harmony. Same thing with ideas, as you were just saying. If we don't have a countervailing force, we careen off the side of a cliff. And I think a lot of big picture, what's going on now is our spheres are trying to correct course. And again, you don't want to go in the danger of going to other extremes. There's a siren song there too. But having said that, I'd like to get more to if you could flesh out what brought you more specifically to advocating for your own people and having a deeper feeling for your own people. How do you go from Marxism sounds great, fairness and peace for all, which sounds nice. I'm not against that categorically, but to feeling, hey, I'm British, I'm English, I'm of European descent, and that's going to matter. That's going to affect how I live and make choices and what I advocate for.
I think that I struggle to find exactly the perfect word, but the closest thing I can find is just that it was almost by accident. I actually had such a lack of, I don't know what you would call it, like racial consciousness when I was a teenager. I remember once, it's really cringeworthy to say, but I remember once saying to members of my family that I wished I was black, and I meant it because I just thought it looked brilliant or something. I mean, for superficial reasons probably, but I was so completely lacking in just any care about what I was, ethnically, that I said things like that. And I was a xenophile, I think. What led me to this position now, where I would say I'm sort of an ethnic nationalist, or I don't really know the perfect word, but certainly an advocate for our people. It just happened in a series of stages. So I realised when I was in my early 20s that I was very much against the left, and for a long time, I would say maybe another 8 or 10 years, that just meant I was mostly against the leftist desire to control us and to have an all-powerful state to which there was no limit, and certainly was free to seize as much of our property as we wanted. That's a typical libertarian position, obviously. But I would say even as late as maybe 2012 or 13, I was still, you could say, a free market SJW. As in, I was very ardently in favour of the free market, against debts, against central banking, quite typical libertarian canards. But I remember cheering, I can't remember when, this would have been about 7 years ago, something like that. I had a friend who you would say is an Antifa guy. I haven't spoken to him for some time, but he was, a proper Bolshevik and, just a hardcore anti-fascist, which we now know means anti-white. He's a white guy himself, but I remember he posted something about the English Defence League getting assaulted at some protest, and I remember cheering, and that it's not that long ago. So I was never just a centrist. I was actually still cheering on the extreme left and anti-white forces in many ways. However, I was reading. It's funny. I was beginning to read what I now realise was neoconservative media. There's a website in Britain called Guido Fawkes, and he's a Thatcherite and I think neocon sort of sympathetic Tory blog, one of the most famous blogs in Britain, political blogs. And he led me to this other website called The Commentator, which is run by someone who used to work for Chatham House, which is the British counterpart to the Council on Foreign Relations, obviously a globalist organisation. And it was really, really pro-Israeli, and I just did not see the significance of all these things at the time. However, they did talk about the rise in the Islamic portion of our demographics. And after the last census in Britain in 2011, the results came out in 2012, and this website, which was a bit of a renegade for what it was, put an article about the rapidly growing Islamic population, and it had doubled in 10 years. And that stunned me. I'd never thought about demographics before. I wasn't against immigration, and then suddenly I was alarmed. And I can't account for why that one moment really grabbed me by the throat, but it did. And from then on, I did care about demographics, and that was 2012. Then I started to follow anyone I could find who was talking about this problem, because the thing that shocked me was not only the rapidness of the growth, but also the fact that our politicians, if anything, most of them were silent. If anything, they seemed to welcome it. And I was, what on earth is going on? And so I was transformed in that moment. And then I started paying attention to anyone who was against this growth of Islam. And still I wasn't concerned about ethnicity, and I was trying to ignore that question. But I started paying attention to these people like the English Defence League and the counter-jihad movement, which we now know there are reasons to be suspicious of. Things like the Gates of Vienna. Now I know who runs these things. But they talked about this thing called cultural Marxism, which I'd never heard of. I was like, all right, I know what Marxism is. What's cultural Marxism? Started looking that up on YouTube. And some of the speeches and videos on it were kind of daft. I remember there was, is it William Lind? He's an American conservative thinker, paleo-conservative. I saw one by him. That was kind of interesting. And then I came across one by Jonathan Bowden. And I assume you guys have heard of Jonathan Bowden. Yeah.
He's one of the earliest I got into. Yeah.
Right. It seems to have been a massive red pill for a lot of people, and he certainly was for me. Partly because it auto played onto his speech about that kind of topic. YouTube auto played onto it while I was working. I didn't realize, and at the end of the video, I was like, oh, "That was fascinating. That was really, really interesting. I want to hear more from this guy." And I noticed at the bottom it was on a British National Party YouTube channel, and I was shocked, because I would never have clicked on something by the BNP. They had such a dirty name, such a the word vile is always used in Britain to denote things that are supposed to be unacceptable, and the British National Party were treated as vile and beyond the pale. Now that was the second really transformative moment for me, because I thought this thing that was forbidden, like black magic, like a grimoire of if you even open the book, you lose your soul. If you even start reading it.
Yeah, I had similar experiences too. And then you realize there's this whole intellectual history and culture that's been hidden from you, and then you start to ask why.
Right, and I'm still opening that book essentially. But the other thing was, I began to suddenly realize, or suddenly ask myself, who on earth put that lasso around me? Who on earth told me I'm not allowed to read that? And that, I'm still tugging at that thread now, but that turned me against the left and against the anti-white forces with a vengeance. And I was never going back after that. and I don't know where I'll be in 20 years from now, but I won't be going back to that, because anyone who tries to control your mind and hide the fact that they're doing so is evil, and that's as simple as that. I won't stand for it. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it actually sets up the next thing that we'd like to speak with you about quite nicely, as another big topic that you hear rehearsed a lot in our circles. It's come up a bit recently, but actually Jason and I don't think we've had someone talk tons about this, except for John Q. Publius, when he was talking about his book about a month ago, we did get into this. But you've talked about the Enlightenment, so we might as well hear a little about that too, because when you talk about first dominoes, obviously there's not a before and after moment. Even the Enlightenment itself had certain antecedents, because everyone's trying to, and it was my first instinct too, you try to track it back and then say, well, what set all this into motion? Where did we go wrong? And what was the poison seed that we're now seeing bear this ugly fruit that we're dealing with now? I have my thoughts, but you're the guest, so I'd like to hear what you've said. I know you had a great stream recently with Endeavor. Great job you guys did. He's someone we'd like to speak to as well. So please send him our regards. We'd like to speak to him at some point. But you did a great stream with him. It's on your BitChute. I recommend people check it out. But if you can just give us a little bit, take us into this whole topic about the Enlightenment.
Well, I do recommend that you have Endeavor on, and he's a great guy. And I also I'll be interested to hear your thoughts about this as well. This question about the Enlightenment and also liberalism is something that I am exploring now, and I would say it's something I'm perhaps relatively ignorant on. I did read. I studied philosophy at university, so I did read passages from Locke and Hobbes and Hume and other Enlightenment thinkers, bits from Rousseau. It wasn't an area I was particularly interested in at the time. Strangely, I don't really know why, but there was other areas of philosophy that drew me more. But it's a question I've begun to revisit recently. I also did a stream with Horus, that's me, Morgoth, and Faust as well from the Netherlands. Which also related to this, if people are interested in watching that. It's on Morgoth's BitChute channel. I wanted to try and determine how much the Enlightenment and liberalism are to blame for our current plight. Because I come from the position where, I've converted to the cause of white well-being. I haven't become myself anti-liberal or anti-capitalist myself. I differ from a lot of the right in this way. However, I do want to engage with those who do make a point of arguing in that area, and Endeavor has done so. He's done a series of, I think, 5 videos. I can't remember the title, but the word enlightenment I think it's Lies of the Enlightenment. And that's why I initiated that conversation with him. He was kind enough to have me on his channel, and he's a much bigger channel than mine. But I prompted it, and I wanted to ask, I wanted to discuss that with him, because I'm not yet persuaded that. It comes down to how you define liberalism. The Enlightenment, I'm still not wholly clear about what the word means, but I do have a fairly clear concept of, or conception of liberalism, yet it differs from most of the people on the right, who definitely do blame liberalism and speak of our enemies as liberals. Whereas for me, liberalism is a philosophy that its believers would defend. And to call people like our rulers liberals seems to me to ignore the fact that they don't defend liberal values. They simply give the left or the anti-white forces everything they want, which I don't think is a liberal thing at all. I think liberalism means defending things like private property, free speech, and so on. And our rulers of now are definitely not doing that. The people in charge of the US, maybe not Trump himself, but the other people in charge, I don't think they like your First Amendment at all. I think they would rather be without it. And we see essays and books released all the time now, especially in like the New York Times and other prestigious publications, attacking free speech directly, trying to get rid of it. To me, that clearly shows that they're not liberals. But putting that conceptual argument aside, I'm undecided so far on how much we should blame the Enlightenment. I think of Rousseau as a bad guy, but I think of the other bad in the sense that he was naively, perhaps excessively empathetic or excessively universalist and too much. I don't know exactly what the right word is, but placing too much value on our common humanity. I don't know. Maybe I haven't fully grasped him. But yeah, basically my answer about the Enlightenment is that I'm still not sure how much to blame it, but I still think there are things to defend about liberalism. So I don't know. I'd be interested in what you guys think of that.
It's certainly a big topic, and I agree. I think there's two main things we need to keep in mind. I'll just say briefly, and then Jason, love to hear your thoughts as well. As Horus said, if you'd like to add anything quickly before we move on. Two main things, I think, when we have a conversation like this is, A, to remember these words kind of do morph. We can't be, I know it's tricky, but we can't be so married to this word liberalism or any other term without understanding that different people invoke it in different ways, and that it was used at different points in history in different ways. The second part is that, yes, history itself, that's a context as well. It was easy for these thinkers on the island that is Great Britain, the main, you know what I mean, with England, Scotland, Wales, that's where most of it came from. I know Great Britain includes Northern Ireland today, but that island and wasn't quite living in the interconnected world that we are today, might not have been quite as able to countenance the idea of the noble savage if they were dropped in the Amazonian rainforest all of a sudden and had to deal with warring tribes there eating each other and things like that. So we have to keep all of these contexts in our heads as well. It's something I'm still learning as well. I haven't directly read the original sources from that time. It's more, I get kind of things secondary, taking in other people dissecting it. I will just say very briefly, again, it's a huge topic. I'm still learning myself. We're all still learning. It's a lifetime, this kind of thing. But my big sweeping general statement where I am right now until I amend it is that it took the divine and the transcendent out of our social order and out of our value system as individuals, our everyday life. Well, individuals and society, of course, because I don't see things in these dialectics as I discussed. I like to see the synthesis and the harmony. So with man being the measure of all things is a humanist idea, and we were seeing that more before the Enlightenment and the Renaissance. Now, there's certainly a lot of fascinating things about how certain proportions in the human body are related to certain geographical measurements as well. There seems to be kind of, you can get into sacred geometry and all of these things like that. And that, as a tangent, sure, that's fascinating. But I would still say that that is a reflection of something that is still higher. And we have that yearning to interface with that transcended, the divine God. I named my project The Great Order, after all. So I do believe we live in a meaningful universe. Taking that out of our lives, to me, as far as I could see right now, that's probably the main poison seed that made man God with nothing else to look up to. And then we can get things like the transhumanism of today, that we can change our bodies, become robots, cut off our genitalia. All these things going on are only possible when that overarching divinity and looking to God, looking at the transcendent, is taken out. Even our founding fathers, as wise as they were in some ways and ways of governance, they were deists. They were technically Christian men, but they saw the God as a faraway clockmaker God and not a personal God, and that has consequences as well. As an American, and this is heresy in America, but I'm even questioning this whole project of monarchy and all that kind of thing in Europe was outdated, and we had to get away from that. I don't know. I'm not so sure. Again, we're reeling from the insanities of our time, so I'm open to. Basically, it opened up all the questions. It's like I'm open to anything that would get us back to where we need to be. Obviously, in the day-to-day, the kind of on-the-ground work we're doing here in this community, the things Jason talks about week in and week out with Going Free, that's a thing you have to keep in front of your mind. We can't get too tied up in the theoretical without the day-to-day, the sovereignty of what you can control over your life. I think most of the people here who are here with us regularly know that's your day-to-day work to sink your teeth into. Don't get discouraged. You can control your choices, what's going on in your family. That's where the Going Free thing comes in. But that's my general thoughts on this big topic about the Enlightenment and whatnot. And Jason, turn it over to you if you have anything to say on that.
Yeah, and then we'll see if Horus had anything to say in response to your comments. But you're speaking a lot of sense there. I think a couple things quickly come to mind that I'll mention, and then we can just keep moving along. And I will say this: thank you to everyone who is here today. Thank you to everyone who has shared the URL for the show today. You can tag myself and Mr. George with questions for us and or Horus, and you can also financially gift on Entropy, which is up and running right now, as well as Cash App. Those will be giving preference, obviously, but we try to get to everybody's questions and comments before the end of the show. I want to say this. I think it sounds like Horus is heading the right direction when it comes to, and Jared, both of what these good gentlemen are saying, are heading in the right direction. What matters for us in service to white well-being is that we all agree on that period. That is what is most relevant. All of the other disagreements are things that we can talk about now. Perhaps we should talk about now: economic, political, etc. These can be things that folks can debate and have conversations about, with I guess the caveat that when we use these titles as for different ideologies and the like, as Jared is pointing out, that those who are doing so specifically define what they mean by the use of that word. So it might mean that folks after so many failed debates, after so many failed attempts at trying to understand each other and discuss what a future could potentially look like for us when we recapture our destiny. And I think there is also another germ of where our thinking has to be. And that is, number one, we have to go free. We have to recapture our destiny. And then we can have the economic structures, the political structures, et cetera. We can have these discussions about other forms of ideology, human interaction, et cetera. In other words, the economy, governance, human interaction, philosophical conversations, none of that is going to recapture our destiny and give us the world that we need in order to experiment with these things, in order to have better thinkers come along. So we have to put things in their proper order. The first thing is going free, recapturing our destiny. And we can discuss these things back to the point that I was just going to make about economy and that sort of thing. And perhaps it will mean that after so many failed attempts to use verbiage from the past, verbiage like liberalism or what have you, that those words just have to be discarded because they're already so charged. They already have so many different meanings. Any person in a discussion could be using the definition from one decade to another century even. And so it makes conversation quite difficult. Now, if we are sticking with the germ of the conversation being that, okay, this is something that we're setting aside, we're having a conversation about it, we're debating it as something that can be relevant and potent for us once we recapture our destiny, then there should never be a splitting up as a consequence of those conversations. There should never be well, these people are just going the wrong way, because all of this stuff is conversations about things that are to come in the future. So perhaps if it reaches that point, then these old terms have to be dropped. And when it comes to, and just say once again, redefining or being, taking the time, taking the pains, and being rigorous when it comes to defining exactly what you're meaning. Too many people who get into these conversations about they endorse this ideology or that ideology or this viewpoint or economic, political, whatever it might be, they just come at the conversation with platitudes, even if they're really well-read folks. They are just sort of like, and then they become solicitous about their personal likes and dislikes, their personal penchants. It's just like these things have to be defended at all costs, as though it matters yet, when it doesn't matter at all. I think we're finally coming to the point, and Horus is demonstrating, I think, a lot of maturity, certainly for his years, and hopefully he'll be one of the ones who will go forward and craft a new form of discussion when it comes to these sorts of things, putting things in their proper order, so that we know we're talking about a time that will come after we do all the hard work of recapturing our destiny and putting in the rigorous effort to clear away the nebulae when it comes to the misunderstanding about the different usages of these different terms. Ultimately, what matters, and we hear Horus talking about this too, is when these folks are saying, oh, well, it's the left or it's liberals or something, and you heard Horus do it today, and you heard Jared do it today, is saying that these are the anti-whites that call themselves this. And as long as we do that, then we can't confuse what that ideology may have meant in its beginning or in its third decade or fifth decade. When people decide they want to sit down, they have a little bit of extra time, they want to use their extra IQ points to discuss these things and about how we might be able to resolve societies and economies and governance in the future in a more equitable fashion for everybody who participates. So as long as I think we take these steps, then we will be, and this is, as I said, what Horus sounds like he's doing here, is being judicious when it comes to such conversations, and therefore productive when it comes to such conversations. It's not productive in the end when people come together and they're disagreeing because they are talking about two different definitions of several different ideologies. This is why when folks have come to me and said, oh, I want to talk about socialism, what are your thoughts about that? And then I would say, what do you think you understand about socialism? You'll have to tell me every single thought you have on socialism so I can speak exactly to whatever it is you think it is. Because everybody has a different opinion. And I'm sure Horus, I know Jared has run into the same things. But that's all I'll say so we can keep this moving along and we can hear more from Horus on that. Horus, any thoughts on what I said? Any thoughts on what Mr. George said? I pass it back to you.
Well, I agree. And there's a reason why I'm sitting, even though I call myself a libertarian, there's a reason why I'm sitting here talking to you guys rather than in libertarian circles, because there's one thing that looms above all else, and that's the well-being of our people. So, yeah, I mean, whatever differences, we three or the larger movement have on how we define these things, we are all focused on one thing that matters more than all that. And so that's why we're talking. So, yeah, I hand it to you or Jared.
Well, on that note, probably a good time to talk about, as I said before, there's a little teaser, so we'll get to this now. Mm-hmm. So you've mentioned libertarianism. Again, given the context of everything we just said, it might mean different things or evoke different things to different people when they hear that. I've heard you speak specifically about certain figures in the Austrian school, and particularly the subjective theory of value. So we hear all the time, hey, we can't just get caught up on GDP and numbers. That's kind of going in the direction of what I was saying a few moments ago about too mechanical and too godless a view of life and people. We're not automatons. There are other values. And you have mentioned how there are libertarian theorists who have a more holistic, perhaps you could say, definition of what value is, and they take in those matters of the human heart and what we make, the choices that we make, our values. It's not just something that could be measured and quantified. So I'd like to hear you start there, and then anything else you'd like to get into about libertarianism. Again, as you said, as Jason said, the main thing we all have to keep in mind is it's not libertarianism as such. You might have certain understandings about libertarianism, but you're using what you like about libertarianism in the service of white well-being and trying to contribute to this project of white well-being, of healing our people, of going free of the psychological poisons. So that is what brings us all together. That's what we have to keep in mind, as you both just have stated, and I'll reiterate. But please go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the subjective theory of value is important. It's an important corrective to the way that our rulers, and this has probably been a thing in other times and places, but it's certainly a thing now, that our rulers try to tell us what matters to us. One very clear example was in the Brexit debate. Obviously, the referendum happened 4 years ago, more than 4 years ago now. But we were told before and during the debate, and ever since we voted wrongly, according to them, that this was going to be very, very damaging economically. The GDP would go down, all sorts of economic problems. I never particularly agreed with that anyway, but even if you take that as true, it's not all that matters to us, the GDP or the particulars of trade. I do think those things are very important, but they're not everything, right? We also value autonomy and independence and having our own homeland, not being ruled by, I don't even know what you call the European Union. It's not exactly a state, and it's not exactly foreign, but the idea that the term foreign state still comes to mind. I think the subjective theory of value, subjective understanding of value, rather than thinking of value as something that we can be informed of our own thoughts about, is very, very important. And it ties in with, I mean, libertarianism to me, why I think I still have a lot, I still think of myself as libertarian, is that it's a question of class struggle in a lot of ways, and obviously not in the Marxist sense. I think the Marxists simply have class wrong. I don't think class is determined by how you make your living, whether you work for it or whether you earn your money from what you own. I think that the important thing in class terms is who rules and who is ruled. And I don't think that's determined by money. I think it's more determined by power. And I understand power is very distinct from money, and as something determined by whether someone has the power to imprison you or destroy you or take away what is yours. And I think I see the sort of nationalist struggle, if I can call it that, or the struggle of the dissident right, is to stop our rulers doing evil things to us. And obviously the evil thing, one of the major evil things that they're doing to us now, is deliberately filling our countries with people we haven't invited, in order to make us, I think, totally controllable and unable ever again to oppose them or to be a problem for them. And I think this is why, I mean, Brexit, I mean, some people are very critical. I know Richard Spencer is very, very critical of Brexit, and other people are as well. They think it's actually, I don't know if they mean it's a mistake, but they think that it's an illusion, perhaps. I think of it as a glorious thing, because our rulers I see as our enemies, and they didn't want it. They definitely did not want that to happen. And we really punched them in the face by doing that. And so, it all ties in with the notion of class warfare from a sort of pro-white and, I would say, libertarian point of view. We're in a struggle for our existence, among other things. We don't know what the future holds, but we are in peril. And that is because of, I believe, the people who currently control the state. So I've sort of answered your question. I don't know. Maybe there's more. Maybe I can clarify it more, but I'll hand it back.
Do you have any kind of inclinations towards a traditional order where there's this acknowledgement of class, where modernism tries to act like there's not different types of people, tries to break down distinctions, but obviously there are. I think the elites that you allude to know this, but the ideas that proliferate down to the rest of us are supposed to tell us that there are no distinctions. Again, as opposed to this idea of, well, there are these distinctions, and thus this side and that side has to be pitted against each other. The workers and the middle class and the rich people, they have to be pitted against each other. Men and women have to be pitted against each other. Do you have, and if so, how does it track with your libertarian streak, that conception of a symphony, a harmony of different types, I know this word carries some baggage for people, but castes or types?
I mean, I really like your name, The Great Order, and the idea of a symphony or harmony. Harmony is a word that I really, really love, a concept that I really love.
Likewise.
Like a social harmony just sounds like a beautiful thing. It's something we've maybe never known in our lifetimes. I don't know about you guys, but it's always seemed like there's turmoil in our country, and it's a lamentable thing. And the idea of a society that's in harmony with itself, or that functions like a symphony, is a beautiful thing that I yearn for. When it comes to class and caste, I don't like the idea of a rigid. I mean, the Indian notion of caste seems to me rather horrible, in that obviously the lower castes might produce people who are capable of far greater, but are literally just rigidly prevented from changing their position. That does not appeal to me at all. But I think Murray Rothbard, who was perhaps the most famous thinker of the Austrian school, put it very well. I don't think he placed particular emphasis on this, but he did say that libertarians, or we don't even have to keep talking about libertarians, but there's no need to impose a hierarchy on society, but it's terrible to deny hierarchy, like natural hierarchy, that in more intelligent people will generally rise to positions of administration and leadership, and that's a good thing. It's not only something we should accept; it's something we should welcome. Finer, more beautiful, more handsome, more fine-figured people will be looked at by more people, will be attractive to more people, will be admired aesthetically by more people. Again, that's good. I prefer beauty to ugliness. And it's a sorry thing for the ugly people, but there's a place for them too. There are times when you see people who you normally regard as ugly and you see something beautiful and brilliant in them anyway. And there's no need to rage against it. Ugly people can be happy in different ways, and it's not really objective anyway, when you see people who you think of as ugly, but they're happy with their husband or wife, that's a beautiful thing as well. It's a lovely, lovely thing. It's a harmonious thing. There's no need, right? I mean, I suppose I can summarize my answer in saying that I think that equality or equalitarianism is the most profoundly sick and deranged and demented idea that there's ever been. It's what I cannot think of a worse idea. Imposing equality on the world, that we are intrinsically and eternally unequal. I don't think any level of technology will ever change that unless it destroys us at our very essence. So inequality is the absolutely most intrinsic principle of everything, of everything human anyway, everything animal, everything to do with life. So to go against it is the worst possible thing that mankind can do. So I don't think superiority should be imposed in terms of rules, but it's there and it's part of what we are. So there, yeah.
Do you have anything to develop on this notion there, where you were saying that there's certain types that naturally are suited to certain positions, but how that's been cleverly usurped in our times? You hear these terms a lot, that the order has been inverted. Not that nothing was ever quote unquote perfect. We don't live in a state of perfect stasis. There's always going to be fluctuations. We know all that. We don't have to get super philosophical about that. But and I'm not saying that I don't believe in having nostalgia for some time I didn't even live in and act like there was some perfect golden age that we need to get back to. So having said all that, and it kind of touches on our enlightenment conversation before and what the world might have been like before that, I definitely want to, I've said this before, Jason, on the show, I definitely want to have a guest. I know Ash Donaldson is on this topic and has things to say. Maybe we could have him on about it, and possibly others, about how the so-called dark ages, medieval Europe, were not quite as dark as we're told in mainstream history, but just kind of siphon that away as a little idea for a future show. But what do you think, Horus, of this idea of what you just said is true, but that's been inverted in that democracy, again, we hear this a lot. I'm just repeating things that are said many times in our circles, that democracy, the system that we have that we call democracy right now, it literally selects for the most psychopathic, unempathetic people who are not the best of us, who do not look to this common good and have this noblesse oblige. And yes, there might be certain distinctions between classes, and sometimes they might look askance at each other, but they're still ultimately the same people, the same stock, part of the same story, with the same trajectory, the same traditions, the same look to the future together. When you don't have that organic whole of a folk, something we talk about all the time on this show and our work, that breaks down, and we get this mechanized system like we have now, where it's only selecting for people who are only into power for power's sake, and the damage that has wreaked. I'd like you to speak about that.
Yeah, I mean, without going into sort of ban-worthy specifics, like anything that can endanger your channel, I think that we are ruled by, in terms of the state and the media, we're ruled by people who have deliberately, as you said, inverted all our normal ideas, and us using almost any kind of, any kind of mechanism whatsoever to turn us inside out. And Democracy, yeah, I do put a lot of blame on democracy as well. I think democracy is generally a bad thing. I think the best rejoinder to it has been produced by Hans Hermann Hoppe, who again was followed on from Murray Rothbard. So again, as part of the Austrian school, and he wrote a book called Democracy: The God That Failed. I'm sure some people listening to this would have read it. He's often mistaken for a monarchist, which is not true. He makes quite clear that he doesn't believe in monarchy, but he just says democracy is clearly worse than monarchy, and there's no going back. There's no going back to before democracy was an idea. We have to go. We have to move beyond it. What he recommends is private law societies where people are able to form, small societies where they live by their own rules. He recommends that anyone who does so excludes anyone who believes in democracy. He believes it's that malignant and dangerous. I'm inclined to agree. I don't know how realistic it is. I know some people would go exactly the opposite way. They say we need to capture the state. We need to use it very, very extensively. But either way, I do believe we're living currently under the rule of people who want to. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this with, various media deliberately put the most hideous and stupid and antisocial people on the front pages and give them columns now and so on. We're not quite at the stage where literal morons are writing editorials for the New York Times. That probably wouldn't work for them, but you got things like Teen Vogue and that just. It's progressing towards advocacy of child abuse as well. And we're living in an unusually strange time where the very worst ideas are deliberately put forward. So I wanted to emphasize that in contrast to where you said that the current system selects for bad people. I do think it's being done deliberately. But did that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Well, it was general. I was parlaying it to you however you want, wherever you wanted to take it.
Yeah, I sometimes go off on a bit of a random wonder with my thoughts. So
well, no, these are big topics, and I do it myself for sure. We've been with you a little over an hour now, and as we like to say, we encourage you definitely get in some questions, some super chats to support our work, and Horus as well, and get some questions for him. What's been on your mind as you've been checking this out and listening tonight? Jason will be collecting those. But why don't we talk about a couple more things? Maybe get a little less heady. So, Jason and I, from the start of this show, have had a special relationship, America's special relationship with Britain. We've always enjoyed a lot of friends and guests who come on this show and we go on their shows. And we always like to check in with our British guests about what the lay of the land is like there, what's kind of in the air, what people are talking about, especially this notion of the points-based immigration system and that discussion. So not a specific question for you. Again, I leave it to you. You're a pro to take this where you need to, but give us a little of the news from your side of the pond.
Well, I think the points-based immigration system was a major plank in how the Tories got elected with a large majority last December, and I am hoping maybe I'm being too wishful here, but I think it's already being. It hasn't been enacted yet, but I think people are very, very skeptical about it. I'm talking about Tory voters, a lot of Tory voters. I think are already really skeptical about it because whether or not it is in itself a good idea, it's not at all. But even if it was, right, we're currently having hundreds of illegal immigrants landing in Kent from France every week now. And it's got a lot of publicity thanks to people like Nigel Farage, who one can complain about in certain ways, but he does do some good things. Thanks to some other pundits. The major media are trying to ignore it. The politicians are trying to ignore it. But we all know it's happening and it is enraging people. And the same government that is allowing that, and obviously deliberately allowing that because they're not apologizing for it in any way, is also the one that's going to be bringing in this points-based system. Well, they obviously don't have any regard for us. So we know that it's not designed for our benefit. It's designed for the benefit of the ruling class and probably for big corporations who want a general... Well, it works for big corporations to just have far too much labour. It's one insight that perhaps Marx was correct about. Other leftist philosophers that more labour and basically a fairly high level of unemployment works for corporations. But it also just helps dissolve us as a people, which I believe our ruling class want, because as a united people, we're difficult for them to manage. So yeah, the points-based system is already attracting a great deal of skepticism, and it's barely even going to lower numbers. It may even increase numbers, and people are increasingly talking about the numbers. There is a lot of focus on that, so it's good. And people like me are doing everything we can to incite anger against this. Well, I don't know if incite is the right word, but just fan it, because I believe that anger is entirely justified, and if anything, too mild. But yeah, so the illegal immigration that's happening all over just every day now is giving the game away. We know that our rulers hate us. They're at war with, this is a term that people keep using now. Our rulers are at war with us, and they're correct. That is what is happening.
All right. Well, that leads to one more thing. Again, please do get some super chats in and questions. We'll have that portion where you can ask Horus some questions. But on that note, we'll tie up with one little thing. Serious, but also a little bit lighthearted on what you were just saying. So if your rulers are at war with you, what is going on in the so-called alternative media where we know you guys have the Groyper thing going on. We have our own version of it here in the States, but particularly I keep hearing about trigonometry and how these guys are just a classic example of gatekeepers right now. I know that you kind of like to look at the fragmentation of, again, this is a general term, and we still like to focus on white well-being, but what's generally called the right. I don't really think in terms of left and right. We've gone over that before. But as a quick placeholder, we know it's a general milieu. The phony right, gatekeepers, and what you all are doing over there to break that down. I know you're one of these guys who there's this theme, this meme of destroy the fence. People who are sitting on the fence. This is not, there's some things, as much as I talk about balance and harmony, please don't misunderstand me for a second. That does not mean that you be moderate, quote unquote, in all things. In an age of madness like we're living in, like Horus was just stating, when you have to come down on the side of truth and beauty and justice and all of that. And unfortunately, in an age of madness, when you take a hard stand on things like that, you will be seen by some as an extremist. So it's a tricky thing. So I do not mean being moderate in all things. I do not mean that we always have to have both sides come to the table and find middle ground. That's not necessarily what harmony always means. Sometimes that is actually an example of disharmony. So we have to be very discerning in this. But having said that, tell us a little about what's going on with trigonometry and destroying the fence over there in Great Britain.
Yeah, and harmony is not something we can simply choose to have. It's something we've got to work towards and develop. I think you'll agree. But trigonometry is an example. Spiked is another example. I'm sure there are some Americans who've come across these channels as well. They're both promoted by YouTube, by others, by Sky News, which is part of Rupert Murdoch's empire, or was. Actually, it's now owned by Comcast. But trigonometry are promoted by YouTube. And they are two guys who I think they present themselves as, well, they used to call themselves free speech advocates. They don't. They deleted that from their description, which is funny, because they won't talk to us because they call us, well, I won't use the word in case it attracts the algorithmic bans or whatever, but they call us extreme right. They imply that we're out to kill people and so on, which is just ridiculous. But they will talk to the extreme left, but they won't talk to us. We're actually really quite moderate in some ways, not in the bad way that you mentioned. But the trigonometry that in particular have made it quite explicit that, they had a victim, that they had a guest on last week who was a victim of the what's very mildly called the grooming gangs in Britain. It's actually much worse than that name suggests. They had her on, and when she said one thing in response, Konstantin Kisin, who seems to be the leader of the two, explicitly stated that whatever we do, however we respond to stop this massive, terrible crime wave that's happening against children, what mustn't happen is that he said we need to go back to thinking of ourselves as individuals. He knows full well when he says that it's white people watching, that the people who are from the grooming gangs are not watching, right? He's not advocating to them to stop acting collectively. He knows that he's preaching to us. And he says the worst thing that could happen is white people collectivizing. He pretty much in those words, I'm paraphrasing a little. He said, we know where that leads, right? Jason, you're shaking your head. You know exactly what this guy's game is, right? It's amazing how brazen he was. But maybe it's just a misstep on it. Maybe he didn't mean to be so. He let on his thoughts without meaning to. Maybe it's. But we're emphasizing that. We know we've cut that clip out. We're sharing that around. And things like that, I mean, prizing open the cracks in our enemy's facade is what the Groyper movement is very, very good for. And the Groyper movement is very, very lively and quick responsive. I mean, you had Unwashed on a few weeks ago, didn't you? And he's a good friend.
Yeah, in June, more like almost 6 weeks ago at this point. But yes, he's been on twice. That was his second time. Yes.
Yeah, great fellow. He's always trying to lead Groyper waves of his own. There's also Patriotic Talk, which you'll find on DLive. Chris leads that, great guy. He's got some good comrades on there. Natty is very, very intrepid Groyper. There's many others. Dangerfield has highlighted these trigonometry guys. And they're, as I say, an example of the phony right. And we're out to basically discredit them wholly because they are consciously stopping people developing the sort of collective consciousness that we need to advance our cause and to defend and help our people. So we're out to thwart them. Yeah.
Oh, and who's saying yes? Elaine Sabatino, great member here in the chat. I haven't watched it yet, but Mark Collett recently did a piece on trigonometry, so please check that out. I don't know if that's a BitChute exclusive. It might be. It
is a BitChute exclusive, okay. And it's a very, very clear and succinct piece. I recommend that video to everyone. And hail Mark.
As he always does, clear and succinct. He's very good at his rhetoric with that. Well, with that, we're going to see what the community here is up to. So, Jason, what is your fingers on the pulse? What is going on with our community here?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is try to talk really slowly and see if the video will catch up with my audio. If not, we'll just put up with it for the rest of the show. But it's been fantastic show so far. It looks like we have one question over in the question widget and one comment that's worth speaking to over on the Discipline channel. And we will get to those in just a moment. And if you all have any more, please make sure that you tag us. Or, of course, you can jump into the question widget on Entropy, financially gift there, and or on Cash App. So a couple of thoughts that come to mind I wanted to speak to before. Actually, the first thing I would definitely want to speak to is that there is no group of people that is illegal. So what we have are border crossers, not illegal immigrants. We have border crossers. Those folks are just astronauts waiting to happen, engineers waiting to happen. All good things come from them, but they do have a different biospirit, and they do complicate the environment and makes things very difficult for distinct groups of people to live amongst each other. And that's what happens when we have all of these border crossers, these astronauts waiting to happen, engineers, lawyers, and the like. So I did want to point out, though, at the beginning of this conversation, or near the beginning, we had, and all the way through, folks, everyone here who's going free, I'm sure you have heard all the way through this discussion how going free, how the lexicon and dialectics apply to everything that we have been talking about, and the things even from Horus's past. And folks, Horus, there are a lot of people here that are really just saying wonderful things about you, plaudits for you, and we do hope that you continue to mature in this direction, and that it's you and others like you who end up really forming how the discussion moves forward from this point into the future, because we've had too much of the destructive old type of debate, discussion, etc., putting ideas that are premature right now ahead of what we have to do today. So you and Harry and others, I hope, are the ones who really form how the debate takes place moving forward about all of these different ideas. I do want to point out that we had Horus mentioned early on in this conversation how when he was a younger man, how it was easier to be anti-white under the rubric, the subsets by the different names that anti-whites will call themselves, than it would have been to be a heretic. And of course, we know when we look at going free, that is exactly the case for all people, because the anti-whites are crafting the morality, this anti-white morality, with their anti-white narrative of the age. And so Horus, like the rest of us, was being infected with meme pathogens. He was learning what it means to be someone who holds anti-white ideas, and that means you're handsome, that means you're intelligent, that means people like you, that means you will get money, that means you'll get sex, etc., and a host of good feelings and emotions with that. And those who hold the antithetical positions to these things, those who get in the way of the infliction of harm on Western kind and Western civilization, that those people are evil, ugly, backward, everybody hates them, you'll never get what you want in your life. And so as a consequence, it's then easy to say, well, it was a lot easier to be an anti-white, that was the moral thing to do. Those who held heretical views under the different names that those people are given, the anti-white slurs, they were considered odd, they were considered evil. I felt that they were objectionable people. Makes perfect sense. But at the same time, we saw that there was still something healthy, very healthy inside of Horus, even though he started down this very saliently anti-white path. And that was at the moment that he became aware of this demographic shift. He didn't have somebody arguing with him. And this is something that we should take great heart in realizing. He didn't have somebody sit him down and say, okay, I'm going to walk you through all of the reasons why this won't be good for you and your people. He was already believing what anti-whiteism was teaching him about all of these other peoples, that they're the same, but they just do everything a little bit better, and they have a little bit of a different look, and they've been victimized for all of time, wrongly put upon by this white race. And yet when he saw this massive change, there was something inside of him that rose up in flame and said, oh, no, this is not going to end up good. This is the blind sight that we talk about in Going Free, that people who have better than average intelligence, that people who have more than average courage, that people who have more than average loyalty, even if it is latent inside of them, that they then exhibit in the real world. So he saw this big change, and as a consequence, decided to begin a search in another direction, even though he had been so victimized. And this immediately reminds me of the video that we made. This Minotaur of Rebellion made that video of me being very angry over the little white girl on the train in the UK. And we've had many episodes of this prior to that one, and many episodes since, of children wishing they didn't have to be white, throwing tantrums because they are white. You don't arrive at that conclusion in any other atmosphere than the one that we paint clearly here, a lens that enables you to see the real world for what it actually is, as anti-white through and through. And we see it manifested in younger Horus as this desire to be a member of a non-white group, to rather be a member of that group. Why? Because that is a special group. And if there are special groups, then we know that there has to be a group that is not special, because you have to have that comparison. And there's only one group out there that can't be the special group, and it is Western kind. So naturally, a young person would choose this direction. Thank God, by just pure aleatory, pure chance, that Horus did not end up doing something that could have irrevocably harmed his totality of his life while he was in that state of mind. Too many of our young people end up doing that. Too many of our young people end up going down directions, white flighting into drugs, white flighting into destroying their flesh with tattoos over their whole bodies. And again, tattoos are okay for those who enjoy the art and that's their thing. But you know what I'm talking about here. White flighting into drugs, white flighting into non-white cultures, which of course are marvelous and beautiful things, and yet don't represent the biosphere of a Western person. So it's not natural for a member of Western kind, a Westman, to LARP as one of these other people. And now you're seeing it doesn't matter how much you LARP as them, as we said all along, they'll condemn you just the same, because you still have that biospirit. You still have it. It won't, that's one of the things that anti-white, non-whites revealed when we had these elected people and people running organizations who were either predominantly white or 100% white, and then they tan themselves over decades as dark as they can, and then they get spray tan and they do everything they can. They get products to make their hair kinky, and the anti-white non-whites came out and said, you're still white. So it didn't matter that they had transformed their exterior into that of a non-white person. The non-white people knew very well, there's a biospirit inside of you that is not the biospirit that is inside of us. So it doesn't matter what you do, brown contacts, dark brown contacts, kinky hair, tanned, black skin, or whatever it might be, you are still not one of us, because there's something inside of you that makes you not one of us. They realize it. Thank God Horus didn't end up coming down one of these horrible paths, and trying to get treatments for all of the tattoos and all of the horrible tanning that he went through as a younger man. The other thing I want to mention really quick, and we'll get to these questions, is when it comes to, and this is what I caution all of those who are going to be deep thinkers and who are deep thinkers like Horus, Harry, and so many others who are coming up, and I laud them for doing so, is the anti-whites make pretextual arguments to arrive at conclusions that allow them to victimize Western kind and Western civilization. There is an enormous error to be made in attacking the pretext and standing with its antithetical position. So what do I mean by that? I mean, a great example of this is the discussion, say, for example, of, and this is why we have to be careful about, we can talk about these things, but especially when you're doing deep dives in these philosophical discussions, you really have to be rigorous and clarify the whole time. And believe me, your audience is going to want that anyhow. I mean, they're going to want you to wax eloquent with as much clarification and as much rigor as you want to take time to engage in. But a great example of this is that the anti-whites will shout from the rooftops, equality, equality. And what ends up happening, and fortunately you haven't done this, Horus, and this is something that we see with a lot of the conservative ranks, they'll come out and they'll talk, ad infinitum about how wretched equality is. Well, that is not exactly an argument that is going to appeal to the ordinary white family. They are going to be thinking about equality under the law. They're going to be thinking about equality of opportunity. They're not necessarily going to be thinking, and I think in almost all cases, they're not going to be thinking about, well, are they actually claiming that we are biologically identical? So when you add these qualifiers where you say, okay, I'm specifically talking about this claim this crazy claim the anti-whites have of biological sameness is absurd. So when you do that, and then you say, and they will erroneously use the word equality because that is a great pretext to conceal this argument. When you clarify it that way, then all of those listening it'll be easier for those ordinary whites and the hundreds of millions around the world to be able to listen to that argument. Whereas you can see, and you could probably think of half a dozen other pretextual arguments where conservatives come out in favor of the antithetical position when the original argument given by the anti-white is just a pretext in the first place. It would be easier, and in most of these cases, the antithetical argument is an argument that is really quite ugly and that the average person is not going to take to. Anti-whites love when conservatives do that. When I worked on the Hill and I saw congressmen and women doing this all the time, I couldn't stop shaking my head. Horus talked about first coming across Bill Lind. I worked with Bill Lind. Everybody holds him in such high regard. I spoke with him on a daily basis in his office, and some others about how when he got started down this path, These were some of the first voices that he heard, and of course, Bill was a very deep thinker, a brilliant person, and I was glad to have worked with him. And he set up a lot of the platform that we now stand on and are able to see further. So let me get to this. We have over on Entropy, we do have DF. The dear lady, thank you so much. She's a wonderful participant in our community, a beautiful woman, $3. Thank you so very much. And writing here, no message, just hello with a smiley face. I love to see it. Thank you. And we have Yiz, who is doing magnificent things. She's come into service to White Wellbeing recently, relative to some of us, and already just doing colossal things in the white positive sphere. We could not be more grateful for Yiz and all that she's doing. And she has a question here. Instead of bringing back a past system like classical liberalism, Natsoc, fascism, monarchy, etc., we should instead borrow from them what worked while eschewing what we didn't, or what didn't, and build something better. So this is what she's speaking to, is a notion that I routinely will speak about, and that is that a future economy, a future governance, these sorts of things will be likely, I surmise, to be something that is more organic and cyclical, that will not be something that sets in place for all time, as we see many other approaches, and certainly one big one that failed just spectacularly recently, but more of an idea of something that's never been done before, and that is something that actually rotates with the cycles of the body of our people, and we seem to be in a cycle in all things. So this idea, it seems like it's that something can be made permanent and never change, of course redundant there, but permanent, is something that's going to be, I think, in the end, that will be left to antiquity, and on top of that we will build something that will be able to cycle with us. So the question being here from Yes, and I think it's kind of spoken to as well when I said that, really clarifying the the elements, for example, of classical liberalism, Natsoc, fascism, or whatever. Of course, we have to be very cognizant, and I know our young deep thinkers are going to be much better than the older ones on this, but we have to be cognizant about what the audience is going to be hearing, because we know what they have learned through the anti-white narrative about certain ideologies. So even mentioning those ideologies in toto as an umbrella for what might be under, it might be best to just not even mention them, just to take the pieces out or discuss the pieces that might be relevant. But essentially what she's saying, should we leave these things behind, not look at them as a total ideology element that can then be applied again to the future? Should we just take pieces from them and then try to put together something that will work better for the future? And Horus, I toss that over for you.
It's perfectly sensible what she's saying, and I agree with what you said. I would add one thing that perhaps exemplifies what she's saying, is that I made a series on my BitChute channel. It begins with the video, The Infolding of the Right. And without going into much detail, it concerns the Second World War and the ideas that we were left with from that. And what I've really done is that I've not made an argument for the Natsoc, or that we should ever try and relive any system from the past. But I do believe that the war was still a disaster. And I think implicit in that is that we should not hate ourselves, and we should feel free to choose what works. So I think that's a very good point. Yeah, I agree.
Fantastic. Now we have also, and then we can see if after this statement, if Jared has anything to say to either of these, and we have a couple other financial gifts to speak to. But we had Paul over on the Discipline channel that commented, saying he wrote here that he used to be an anarcho-communist, and he thought it was a great idea. And it seemed like, let's see, what does he say? It seems like a lot of people eventually move over to our sphere, he writes. So a lot of the folks who were in that sphere, anarcho-communism, moved over and do so eventually move over, sort of a pipeline, I guess, to our sphere once they mature and learn some history. It sounds like he's speaking directly to some of your experience, Horst. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I never had the anarcho bit so much, but obviously there will be some people who are stuck in that for life. Hopefully not many, but I think your idea of it being the product of mean pathogens is a really good way of putting it. And there is a degree of luck in freeing yourself from it. But when you, at least if and when you do free yourself from it, you do gain in being able to reflect upon it. And I'm by no means the only one who's made that path. You know, Chris Dangerfield, who's got a YouTube channel as well. He's a great guy, and he'll still tell you there's bits of Marxist or post-Marxist theory that he still finds very valuable. But what the kind of world that Marxists want, he has completely turned against, you know, and he's now, you know, in our cause. So I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. And we have over here on Cash App two greats, great participants in the community in service to white well-being, Zero Talent and DB Cooper. Zero Talent financially gifting $5 and DB Cooper doing the same. I doubt that they had coordinated ahead of time. That is pure chance, but thank you both, heroes in our community. We also have another question from Yiz, I think, or statement. And we have, I think this is from Rosie Clown, something about a question for Horus about, is that King Hollet and some queen deposed? Do you have any thoughts on that? I don't even know who that is or what that is.
King Hollet. Is that what it says?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't know.
Jeff Hollet and his. So Jeff Hollet, is that somebody that you know? Maybe the king part is a hyperbole.
Oh, I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know.
We have Hansa. No worries. We have Hansa over here saying we old folks ain't plumb dumb. No, you're not. None of the old folks are dumb. Some of these older individuals in the white positive sphere that discuss philosophy and that take deep dives on different topics, they approach it in a way that is counterproductive, to say the least. That's a euphemism. But I think these new guys coming along are going to take a much more productive approach to the deep dive, in that they understand that the time is now, the sands in the hourglass are now too few to spend great time and great effort on getting in fierce discussions on which is going to, you know, what would Nietzsche think. And if we don't go Nietzsche's route, then, and we don't communicate that to the masses, then there's no hope. I think this newer crop, bright young people, they're not going to have a problem with seeing that, you know, Santayana is coming over the walls of the Alamo. There's no more time for that sort of discussion. We also have Prosperity financially gifting $3 Canadian dollars. And 3 Canadian, what are the honking dollars for the Canadian goose? I was trying to think of something that would work with the hopping dollars from Australia. I think that Horus's video regarding the infolding of the right is really important. The supposed right of conservatives adopting leftist framing and language is a defeat. Also, Pat Buchanan is great. Well, that's a great afterthought. And any thoughts about Horus, about your video, or anything else you wanted to say in particular about that video?
Oh yeah, I'm really pleased with that video, and it was the subsequent 5 or 6 videos were all part of a series. One of which was about Pat Buchanan's book, The Unnecessary War, which I recommend that book. And that video, what you were saying about the sort of deep dive videos, people will see on my BitChute channel. If you scroll back to the videos I made since last year, well, the oldest ones on the channel, you'll see several. One's called Against Brian and Avi, another one's called Death by Community Self-Defense, yeah, the unfolding of the right and the subsequent 5 or 6 videos are a series about the Second World War, and they are what I produce when I sit on my own and do a lot of research, think and write out, you know, quite a considered statement, you know. So it's a different product to, you know, what I do on a live stream. So if people are interested in that, I recommend they check it out. And when I see that people are watching these things, let alone leaving comments, I'm delighted, because it just makes you feel like you're part of something, and that people are interested in my thoughts is very complimentary. So
Yes.
yeah, I appreciate the comment.
No, that's absolutely fantastic. And I think what we have final here is, let me just refresh that screen over there. Oh, we do have the great Aunt Sally, a lovely lady. In fact, folks, I met both of these wonderful people, Horus and the Aunt Sally, and wonderful people, both of them. And so is Aunt Sally's dear friend. And she gives us a little bit more information, saying it's that this person is some guy in Australia who claims to be the true king of England through his bloodline. So I guess that's the individual that was referenced earlier. And I don't know if we have any other news on him or not.
I have a counterclaim. I have a counterclaim to
Oh, really?
that. So him and I'll have to hash that out.
Well, you might be better than I think very poorly of our current monarch. So I'd be interested in hearing more about your claim. I reckon you'd be better at it.
Yeah.
So, talk more about that another time.
He probably would be, even if he's high on whatever, he probably would be much better. Now, the final thing we have here is Yiz pointing out that diversity and equality mean and have always meant fewer men, fewer whites, and fewer Christians. Both terms mean the removal of Western kind. They exactly do. We call it like it is here, and Yiz is sharp as a razor blade. That is exactly what they mean. Any thoughts on that, Horus?
Well, yeah, I would reiterate what you said about the way that our enemies use pretextual arguments for getting to what they really want to achieve, and it's such a crucial thing to appreciate that tactic and to speak accordingly. Yeah, to realize what it is that they're really. I mean, that immediately puts me in mind of critical theory. I think that's the perfect example of that. It's framing things so as to reach a predetermined outcome, and that's certainly what's been done with diversity and equality. And it's a clear example of what you said.
Well, we're going to keep you talking, brother, because we've gone into the 1.5 hour mark, and we'll have you tell everybody what you are working on and where they can find you. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, that you can find only the on-platform links in the description, but you'll see there are a number of other options for Horus. You will be able to find those on my website, Jared's website, and our joint website. It will all be available there, as you all probably know, and share with others, those who don't, that this channel receives strikes for sharing off-platform websites, any new ones since they started that process. So that is where you will be able to find those. So, but Horus, you are free to name them and do so now, along with what you're working on and what you will be working on in the near future, brother.
Well, they really want to get you. If they're giving you strikes for that, they're just on your case. Well, I'll just give if you don't mind, I'll just give 2 quick shout outs. Firstly was to Aunt Sally, and thanks for her comment. Aunt Sally's a lovely woman who I've met a few times now. And I see her, she's in the chat. Also, my good friend History Bro, who is also in the chat. I recommend everyone go and visit his channel, simply called History Bro. Brilliant videos about history. He's a particularly good merger of music and visuals, but mostly his content is him talking about history. And I'm on some of his videos as well. And he's a great friend of mine as well. I am currently working on a 3-part series, which, if I was to go into detail, I would probably risk you getting more community strikes. But I don't know. People can ask me on another less censorious forum. I'm on Twitter at Nasty Mutant. Stupid name, but it's from when I was a teenager. I am on Telegram. Just search for Horus. I'm on a few other things, but those are my main places. Telegram, obviously, is quite friendly to us at the moment. I don't know if it will last, but yeah. And what else was it? Oh yeah, well, I put all my videos on BitChute. I've also got a YouTube channel. Like my second YouTube channel has not been banned yet, which I just use for live streams. But you won't see any content on there because I take it off to avoid getting banned. So I put those videos on my BitChute as well. So that's my main place. The anti-white forces in Britain are coming after BitChute as well. They want to get it shut down. So I mean, I may have to.
Really?
Yeah. I may have to. Yeah, the same kind of people who are attacking us everywhere else. Yeah, probably in this series of 3 videos that I'm currently working on, I will name some of those organisations, and I also named some of them in the video that I did called Against Brian and Avi, which people can see also on BitChute. Also another reason for them to try and shut BitChute down. Yeah, I'm attacking the people who are coming after us. But yeah, I got banned for basically naming them directly and calling them out. So yeah, so I'm really happy to have been on. I really thank you guys. You're both doing great work. And yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, everyone check out History Bro. I'll just say that again. Great friend and a great channel. And thank you guys for hosting tonight.
Well, you were spectacular, brother, and we're going to have you back. We should be having you on more often. And Mr. George, if you have any thoughts on any of those questions or comments that either I or Horus made, please give them to us while you wrap up tonight, and give everybody that magic address where they should be finding us instead of on YouTube.
I'm gonna wrap it up. I don't have anything burning. Thank you for that, but anything burning to add to the topics. It's been a great conversation, Horus. It was wonderful to finally have you on for a full tap, and we'll be doing more together. Is very enjoyable. As Horus was saying about BitChute, even though there are these alternative platforms that we know seem a little better now, how can I say this without sounding like I'm lecturing? I've never been the kind of person, in all honesty, that tries to tell other people what to think and feel. I'm a pretty laid-back guy, but it's for all of our benefit. We really encourage you guys to bookmark websites. Websites are not dead just because we're in the age of social media. We have the afterparty.tv. Jason has nowhiteguilt.org. I have thegreatorder.com. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap among those when it comes to work Jason and I do together. But we really do encourage you to bookmark all 3 of those. Any of these shows, like if you're listening now, especially if you're driving and listening to this on podcast form via Spreaker or perhaps other podcast platforms we get on in the future, as Jason was saying, all of Horus's links, if you're not following him already and you're like, man, I like this guy, where can I follow him? Those will always be on the posts for these episodes on our sites. I use a different way of cataloging the videos on my own site and on the shared site on theafterparty.tv. I give a YouTube link, a BitChute link, again, maybe others in the future. But even if both of those went down, you would still be able to watch these videos. I'm not going to say too much. It's not worth saying it and having something else get targeted. But you'd still be able to watch those videos, even if Jason and I lost our YouTube channels and our BitChute channels, right on the posts on our site. Mm-hmm. So that's important. Ways to get in contact is important. Joining the mailing list. So please do remember that. I've taken as much precautions as I can to have my site and the Tap TV site, again, the afterparty.tv is the actual URL, so that the hosting is very secure, and it would be much harder for the people who don't want our message to get out there to maneuver to take away our sites. Nothing's impossible, but they're about 100 times more secure than our social media accounts. So please do take that to heart and get on the mailing lists and everything. We don't send out frequent mailings. We're not going to spam you. It's less than once a month on average. We just do a little check-in, a little roundup of what we're doing and what's going on. So anyway, having said all that, I want to quickly mention our friend Poseidon, who's been on this show a lot and is a great friend of ours. He's doing a stream at 6:30 Eastern tonight. So if you want to keep this community feeling and everything going on, that starts in about 40 minutes from right now. Aside from the aforementioned email lists, I am on Telegram. It does seem to be more robust these days, but I haven't really built it up yet. So go check me out there. My link to that and everything else, all my other social media platforms, all the usual suspects are all on the contact page on my site, thegreatorder.com. I'm not going to give you all my social media. One place for me to remember is very easy, thegreatorder.com. And that's a catalog of all work I've ever done, video and otherwise, contact page, or all the social media. I appreciate you following and all that. There are a lot of projects coming up, a lot that's been going on behind the scenes. And if you want to be privy to these new things I'm doing, both with Jason or other people or myself, then please do go check those out. Next tap, very exciting. The Golden One returns. He was on a year ago and he's coming back. That's Thursday. It's going to be at 6 p.m. Central European time on Thursday, August 6th. That's 5 in the UK. That's noon, a little early for us here in the Eastern United States, but always great to speak to him and check in with him on the good work that he's doing. Other than that, Jason, please take us out for today. And my love to all. I'll talk to you all soon.
Very well said, my dear friend. Very well said. Let's get a big thank you to everyone who showed up today, commented in the live chat, everyone who will comment on the thread after the video is up. A big hello to all of you and thank you. A big thank you to everyone who financially gifted over the course of the show, asked questions, made comments. We appreciate all of you. Let's get an especially big thank you to our moderator, Roy Danton, who had to deal with a handful of troublemakers today, wanting to say things that would get the channel in some trouble with Susan, and also give us a bad look for all of our brothers and sisters who are showing up, having a look for the first time at what it's like to go free, as opposed to all of those antiquated forms of serving the service in the white positive sphere, and also just what they normally engage in, which is looking as much as they can like the bad guys in the anti-white narrative. So big thank you to Roy for keeping a handle on those folks. And I want to shine a spotlight on a few people, one of those people being History Bro. And I'd actually taken that name down earlier in the show when I saw him. And we had History Bro here. We had Juliet, Not Applicable. We also had Right Reaction. So was the great Venus Rising was here. And finally, a final spotlight for Bored Troll was also here. I doubt Bored for even a second over the course of the show. But it's always a great service to be able to be here with you all, to be here with the great, and the final big thank you to the great Mr. George for all that he does to make sure that every single one of these TAP episodes are top notch, and that it's educational, that it's entertaining, that we find out a lot about it. And this is really what TAP is doing, folks, is we are digging into the folks that we are interviewing so we can come to know who they are and how they came to where they are better than we did before. And that deepening of that relationship does so many wonders for the building of community and the making us real people to each other, so that when the anti-whites inflict injury on us, on any of our individuals, we feel that sensation of a brother or a sister being harmed, and we want to step in front of the attacker and to prevent that from happening. That's going to be the only way that we are going to be able to recapture our destiny, is as a single people that has many countries around planet Earth. It's been a great pleasure, and we look forward to seeing you all again